Hello, JCU alumni and friends. I'm Spencer German, and I serve as the Alumni Engagement Specialist in the Office of Alumni Relations at John Carroll University. And I'm thrilled to be back with our latest installment of the Young Alumni Spotlight, featuring a friend, a classmate from the astute class year of 2013, I might add, Dan Cooney. Dan has a great story. He was our class's recipient of the Tim Russert Fellowship. That has also led him into other roles in his career. Currently, he is a social media producer and coordinator at PBS NewsHour. Dan, can't thank you enough, man, for being our featured alumni for this April installment of the Young Alumni Spotlight. I want to give you the floor here just to share a little bit more about yourself, your story, and what it is that you do in your role at NewsHour.
Absolutely. Spencer, first of all, thank you for the invitation to join the series here. This is awesome. In my role as PBS NewsHour's social media producer coordinator, that means I lead a team of a couple of journalists. We're all in the trenches, managing the NewsHour's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram accounts primarily, and we also manage social media accounts for a Friday night show on PBS that NewsHour produces called Washington Week, which is a political analysis show. And we make sure that everything that goes out on those channels is accurate, meets editorial standards, is written correctly, fairly, accurately. We have editors' eyes on everything: graphics, videos, text, making sure articles are good to go to share on social media, making sure that for the NewsHour's and Washington Week's audiences and wider audiences out there, that there's accurate information being shared with them, making sure that we're informing Americans and people around the world what's going on in the world, why it matters, what the context around it is. And we take that job extremely seriously. So it's a privilege to be in that role, to kind of have, to be able to share the news and to make sure that it's told accurately for our followers and viewers.
I mentioned at the top, Dan, sort of sharing the background to you. You were our class's Tim Russert Fellow, and I know that's a very prestigious opportunity. Only one person gets it every single year. Just what did it mean for you in terms of your career to have that experience? What did you take away from it? How did it help you get to where you are now?
Hugely. And yeah, so I, as you mentioned, I got the Meet the Press Fellowship in 2013. I think I was the fifth, and started at Meet the Press that fall. And that's a 9-month fellowship that later turned into another year as a production associate. In those jobs, I got to have, a real hands-on role in the show, which was really incredible. For someone who was just starting out in professional journalism, researching for interviews and crafting questions for the producers and the moderator to discuss about, how we want to question our newsmakers or our panelists that we had appearing on the show that Sunday. Putting together a morning note so that our producers and our moderator were aware of the major headlines of the day, making sure they had the latest updates available to them when they needed them. What else did I do? Greeting guests. So everybody from U.S. senators to prominent journalists to, I think I met former British Prime Minister Tony Blair at one point. I think I got to talk to Gary Bettman, who is the NHL commissioner, when he came on the show. It was just a really cool experience. In the course of working at Meet the Press, every Sunday when I was on the show, and actually still on the show, there's a political panel every Sunday, journalists and strategists who offer analysis on the week's news. And one Sunday, I got the opportunity to meet Gwen Ifill, who was a really prominent journalist on PBS, hosted Washington Week and was the co-anchor of the NewsHour for several years. And my time at Meet the Press was coming to an end because it's a contractor gig. It has an end date associated with it. So I got to talk to Gwen, And that turned into a fellowship at Washington Week, which she hosted on Friday nights, her political panel show. And from there, that 6-month fellowship turned into where I am at the NewsHour now, producing and editing social media content.
You mentioned in your current role, obviously social media is what you do. And I can relate to that in my role here in alumni relations as well. But just from a news angle of it, like, how have you seen social media's presence in, I guess, the sharing of news and information change over time? Because I mean, I remember taking a social media class at John Carroll, and our professor basically laid out, like, nobody really knows like how social media, like what trends and how things like pop the way they do, and what's going to hit on any given day. But it's ingrained itself into our society as an outlet that we all certainly use. So just how have you sort of seen that evolve and in your role and elsewhere?
Oh, it's evolved immensely in the last 10, 15 years. When you and I were at John Carroll, Twitter, and I don't even think Instagram existed yet. Twitter was just becoming a thing. Facebook, it was like the shiny new toy in some ways. The growth of it and the influence it has in all aspects of our society and our politics and our life is incredible. In my time, I'll admit, as a student at John Carroll, I was kind of skeptical of social media. I'm like, I'm not sure I can actually tell a complete and contextual story and get information across in an accurate way as effectively on social media as I can on a normal television broadcast or in a newspaper or in some other type of media. But I grew to adopt it and to see its potential and to see how important it is in relaying news, and how important it is that we as journalists and as news organizations are on those platforms to first make sure people have access to quality news, and then to also make sure that we're combating any misinformation that's out there on social media, because it's there. It's a part of how media is consumed these days. So it's changed immensely from, I remember when I was starting at the NewsHour, the big thing was Facebook Lives, and certainly those are still a part of strategies. Now it's more short Instagram Reels or TikTok videos. In my role, that kind of gives me an opportunity to take the great journalistic background and ethical considerations that I learned at John Carroll and in my early career here, and apply those to these platforms. And what's important to get across, how do we tell it in a compelling way, but make sure that we're also upholding the editorial standards of the NewsHour and making sure that we're, getting the story across fairly and ethically and accurately.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And obviously, like you alluded to, just how it's evolved over time is so interesting. There's a lot to unpack there. I'm sure we could go on and on, but we'll save that for another program. I always like to end with this one, Dan. You mentioned, just what you learned at John Carroll and how that's kind of played a role into where you are, and specifically with social media and how that's changed. But also, there's so many different things that you learn while on campus that have gotten you to where you are. So if you could give a piece of advice to a current JCU student getting ready to enter the workforce, what would it be that you would share with them?
Oh my gosh, several, at least a couple come to mind. Keep in touch with your professors. I'm still in touch with Bob Knoll, and I'm still in touch with Dr. Buchanan. And I'm very grateful for all that they did for me as a student and continue to do for me in my career, whether that's references along the way or advice, or just to talk about the state of journalism at this moment. It's so helpful to have them as it was helpful to have them as professors and as teachers, and now it's even more helpful to have them as friends now in this stage of life. Entering the workforce, it's a really good question. I mean, just be prepared to learn and soak up as much as possible. because you're entering the workforce. You've learned a ton from college. You've paid attention in your classes. You've taken tests. You've acquired a good skill set and a good base of knowledge. There's still so much more yet to learn, and you won't have all the answers, and that's okay. Sit back, learn, watch, observe, and ask questions, and get to know really smart people in your field when you have the opportunity to do so. I keep in touch with the current or the Meet the Press fellows that came after me, some of whom have reached out recently and said, let's get coffee. I'd love to talk about, what your experience was and what advice you might have in the future. And that's, I'm always happy to do that for anybody, Meet the Press Fellowship or not, about journalism, about politics, about media in general. So it's those are kind of the two main, I think, pieces of advice I have is stay in touch with your professors and be ready to learn once you hit the workforce.
Some profound advice, in my opinion, from Dan Cooney, who is our April Young Alumni Spotlight. Stay tuned for another Young Alumni Spotlight from the Office of Alumni Relations next month.